What up, guys? The Bench Buddies are back with our Week 12 NCAA football preview and picks. As always, I have Ty joining me here this week to break down this week's games. But before we get into it, we got to talk about an abysmal week for us last week. And yeah, if you combine our records, we are 11 and 11, broke 500, but it wasn't pretty for us. But at the same time, it was the result of us taking different opponents in a lot of different games. I mean, you can see here. There are 5 games where we had different, and it didn't really favor one team this week because it was a crazy week of college football. But I'll start with you. What was probably either the best takeaway out of this week or the best game?
My biggest takeaway, I guess, is that Alabama is back. I think a lot of people wrote them off after the 2 losses, but obviously, just going into Death Valley at night, that might be the hardest environment to play in all of football. They went in there and just absolutely dismantled LSU. It wasn't even as close as the final score. So I think they're back, and they're definitely a national title contender now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. They're still hanging around. I mean, even after Georgia's loss, still with 2 losses, kind of the same boat, both these teams here. And I think I'm going to give some credit to the Buffaloes here. I think they're still flying under the radar and they can win out. If they win out, they're in the Big 12 championship game playing for a spot in the college football playoff. In year 2 of what Dion is rebuilding there, I don't think getting in the playoff is the end goal, obviously, but even getting the Big 12 championship is a huge success for them. And then last week, it was brutal all around the board for all of us. Luckily, I broke 500, so hopefully I didn't lose you guys too much money where Ty's one homer pick was the one that got him the win.
Horrible. On to the picks.
Yep, on to this week's. Yep. And I'm going a lot of spreads this week, just like you. I'm going to Texas. I think they're going to cover. I liked Arkansas earlier in the year after the Tennessee upset, but they've fallen apart. Tulane, it's kind of same thing. Navy's fallen apart. I do like the Boston College 18.5 at SMU. They've been playing some close games recently. Like I told you before, ASU, Kansas State, the over. It's a big Big 12 game. Normally those result in a lot of points. And then I'm on the other side of what you are going with. I'm going Tennessee plus 10.5 at Georgia. Even if Nico plays, I still think this Tennessee team, like you always say, your famous phrase, defense and a run game travel, and that's exactly what Tennessee is known for. In Georgia, we don't know what Georgia team you're going to get. So I like 10.5, especially the half point. And then BYU -3 at Kansas. This team's squeaking by, but I think this is a week where Kansas is coming off of a huge win. So this could be a big letdown game for them.
All right, my theme this week is I'm not overthinking it this time. We're just gonna pick what is right there in front of us. Ohio State -28.5. Yeah, that's a lot of points. But come on, it's Ohio State against a very inferior team. They always just blow those teams out. So I think we see more of the same here, even at Wrigley Field. Colorado is playing as good as anyone in the country. Utah sucks, just lost to their rival in heartbreaking fashion. Now they're going on the road, so Colorado covers. Penn State. Yes, Purdue is awful, but Penn State, these games they just win like 27-3, 31-7, just run the ball in the whole second half, kind of run the clock down. Feels like they never drop 50 or 60 on a team. And 28.5, I think Purdue covers that, unlike Northwestern. Arizona State and Kansas State have the same record. Arizona State might be playing better than them and getting 8.5, so we're going with them. Georgia, I think the Georgia we're going to get is a pissed off Georgia at home at night against a Tennessee team who may have Nico, may not. And then BYU just barely escaped last week. Kansas is the best 3-6 team of all time, and I think they cover and win that game.
Yeah, and then we'll move to our picks this week, just straight up. Clemson, I'm taking them. I think maybe 3 weeks ago, might be leaning towards Pitt just because, well, they're undefeated, playing some good football, and then one loss has derailed this season. They were what I think high as 13, I believe, 13 and 14 this year, and now they've already fallen out of the rankings after the last 2 losses, where Clemson's playoff hopes are hanging on by a thread. And this, I think, is a good resume builder in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I think Pitt is barely ahead of Missouri right now for the worst 7-2 team in the Power Four because they have just looked awful their last 2 games after being 7-0. And Clemson, yes, they had that hiccup against Louisville, but I still think they've been playing well outside of that game. So I think they go on the road and win pretty comfortably here.
And also at 12, I think kind of same result, like you said, pretty comfortably is a win for Texas here. I expect Arch Manning to play in this game, and that's kind of telling you how I think this game's going to go. Texas probably struggles in the first quarter, maybe a little in the second because it is a road game, but they make the halftime adjustments. And like I said, Ewers isn't playing in the fourth.
Yeah, I don't see this game being very close either. I think that Arkansas win over Tennessee was just kind of a blip for them. I don't think they're back, and I think Sam Pittman will probably be fired at the end of this season. So I think Texas goes in and coasts, and like you said, I think they play two quarterbacks.
And big noon kickoff, you get Utah, Colorado. Like we said, we're obviously taking Colorado here, and the Buffs are back. I think this is a huge win, not only just because, former Pac-12 members kind of game, and I think it's gonna be turning of the tide of those Pac-12 teams where Colorado could be the team where they start to solidify themselves now in the Big 12 as one of the better teams. And Utah kind of falls back down to reality here with their run that they've had the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, I already picked Colorado to cover that 11 and a half, so obviously I'm taking them here. I think Utah being 4-5, just having lost to their biggest rival, I think that was like their national championship this year. That was really their last chance to salvage the season. They couldn't do it. Maybe it was a bad call in there that cost them the game. Who knows? But bottom line is they lost the game. They have really nothing else to play for this year. And obviously, Colorado has everything to play for, and they are absolutely rolling right now. So I think they win very easily.
Yeah, and I think you'll probably be tuning into this one, at least to check the score. It's 8-2 versus 7-2 in a non-power four school. Could be potential for a playoff spot in this game if Boise State were to slip up. So I'm going with Tulane here on the road. Obviously, I took them to cover, but Navy, ever since that Notre Dame game, has just fallen apart. And Tulane, go look at their schedule and who they played. Yeah, I guess they're in the American and it's not as tough as some of these other conferences, but a win is a win. And for these non-power four teams, you got to keep on winning to give yourself a shot. And I think that's what Tulane does.
Yeah, I think people need to pay a little bit more attention to Tulane because Boise State did struggle last week. They've struggled in a couple other games. So Tulane is really a Boise State loss away from potentially being a playoff team. But that starts this week. They have to get out of Maryland with a win, beat Navy, and I think they will. I think Navy is kind of reeling right now, and I think that'll continue.
And then moving to the 3:30 slate, LSU, Florida, and I'm going with the upset here. Obviously last week they announced Billy Napier was coming back next year, and what they do proceeded to get absolutely blown out by Texas. And I think this week it's gonna be a different story. I'm going with the Gators at home, only based on the fact because LSU isn't the same football team that we thought they would be just 2 weeks ago. This team struggled these last few weeks. Same for Florida. Maybe the under could be in play here for that sixth lock of the week, just because, I think both these teams aren't going to score a lot of points here. And if that's the case, the home field advantage comes into play. So give me the Gators.
Yeah, I think LSU's defense not playing a run first quarterback like we saw with Marcel Reed and Jalen Milrow. I think they'll get their footing back again after the struggle last week. And Florida, most years I would pick them in this spot with LSU coming off that bad loss. But I think Billy Napier staying is a terrible decision by them. I think we'll see more of that on Saturday. I think LSU maybe plays them close, but I think they still get out of the swamp with a win.
Yeah, also at 3:30, you got Boston College versus 8-1 SMU. And talking about taking teams seriously, I think SMU kind of got the short end of the stick this week on the rankings, first team out right now, but someone has to be that team. But if they keep on winning, more than likely this team is going to find themselves in the playoff no matter what happens. If they finish 11-1, maybe even 11-2 in the ACC with the loss, I think it's hard not to put this team in based on their resume. And Boston College isn't a team to look over because this team was really good at the beginning of the year, but the quarterback injury since kind of derailed their season. I like SMU at home here. The Mustangs get to 9-1.
Yeah, I think even with maybe some disrespect in the rankings, I think SMU is still in a great position right now. Because if they win out, they're a top four seed. They get a first round bye in the playoff. I don't think anyone really expected that out of them this season. But now with Boston College at home, I think it's a great chance for them to get to 9-1. And they can just continue to roll, get to 11-1, and set up that matchup with Miami or Clemson. I think they'll get there, and that starts with an easy win here on Saturday.
And at 4:15, a huge game in the SEC. Missouri, South Carolina. Playoff hopes are dwindling here, and whoever loses more than likely is out of the playoffs, let's be honest. I mean, South Carolina has a chance just because, it's the SEC, anything can happen. Same for Missouri, but that two losses compared to three for Missouri benefits them, obviously. But with that being said, I'm going South Carolina at home. They're playing a lot better right now. Missouri doesn't know who they're starting at quarterback, it feels like every week, where South Carolina has really figured out and turned a page after the first 4 or 5 games this year.
Yeah, Missouri's also just one of the worst 7-2 teams I've ever seen. Luckily, they have Pitt this year holding that down. But they every time they go on the road this year to play a really good team, they have gotten their doors blown off. And I think this will be not quite that like 34 to nothing, but I think South Carolina still wins comfortably. They're another team like Colorado that's playing as well as anyone right now. I think those three losses are really going to hurt them at the end of the season because two of them were very winnable games. And I think this team could get to 9-3 with how well they're playing.
Yeah, then moving to the nightcap, Arizona State, Kansas State. I am going to go with Kansas State at home here because, like you said, make it very simple. What the paper tells me to pick, go with K-State here because they're at home. And as much as I want to go Arizona State, I wouldn't be shocked, honestly, if they go in there and pull off an upset because Arizona State has been playing kind of to the level of their competitors. So hopefully this should be a really good game. But Kansas State has been more susceptible of being upset, even though that they figure out ways to win games close. And I think you can't do that this week. You got to make a statement. The Wildcats do it with a big question mark around it. If there's any week to make a statement, to me at least, Kansas State has to come out and probably win by 10 or more for me to really take this team seriously moving forward.
Yeah, both of these teams are still very much alive in the Big 12 race. Therefore, they're still alive in the playoff race. And Arizona State has been one of the more scrappy teams in the country this year, which is why I picked them to cover. However, Kansas State playing at home, I think, will be just enough of an edge for them to get a really close win here. I just think they're maybe not as much battle tested this season, but they are a very old team, one of the older teams in college football. I think that's going to be a big difference here, and they stay in the Big 12 race.
And then at 7:30, the biggest game of the week, Tennessee, Georgia. Now, obviously, the SEC bias on TV is crazy. In Georgia, getting their bad rep, where I think they should be here. I mean, two losses, and they weren't 1 point losses. I get you have some big wins too, but what is this committee going to favor? Two losses or one loss? I think, you got to go with the one loss at this point. And if Georgia wins out, they're going to make the playoff regardless. So who really cares at this point, right? It's just the early rankings. Now, Tennessee's case, if they lose this game to Georgia and they're 8-2 with a bad loss to Arkansas, now that comes into play. But I don't think that's going to at least be a factor this week because I got the Vols on the road going into Athens, pulling off a huge upset. Whether Nico plays or not, you've always said it famous. I said it earlier in the video, defense and a run game travels in Georgia. Well, we don't know what Georgia team we expect. Carson Beck's going to throw 3 interceptions in a half, or is he going to come out and just absolutely light up this Vol defense? I'm thinking it's going to be trending towards the 3 interceptions because he struggled late. All signs are pointing to Carson Beck's draft stock going down. So give me the Vols here, and their defense really carries them to a win.
Yeah, I think this is a scary matchup for Tennessee. Yeah, first of all, Georgia on the road at night. That's already tough. And then you have a pissed off Georgia and Georgia with their backs up against the wall. So all of those things are very scary when playing against this team with Kirby Smart. We've seen it in years past. Their backs are against the wall. They just dominate teams. And I think this will be more the same of that 2022 matchup. Tennessee went in there ranked number one and really just got thoroughly dominated by Georgia. And I think this will be similar to that. Yes, Carson Beck has struggled, but I just don't know if I see the Tennessee offense moving the ball much on this Georgia defense in this game. I think Kirby Smart definitely has their attention now after how last week went. So I think they win this game by about 2 touchdowns and put themselves right back in the playoff race.
Also, at 7:30, probably a game you'll be tuning into when that game goes to half or commercial. Oregon, Wisconsin. Oregon only has 2 games left, which, is kind of uncommon at this point in the season. They're getting a bye next week, and they're going to go into that bye 11-0. Nothing more to say that Dylan Gabriel and this team has been an absolute powerhouse this year. One of the few, or one of, what, they're the only ones undefeated, aren't they? or
Them and
BYU.
Army.
Yeah, BYU and Army,
Yeah.
Oregon. So there's one of three, and Oregon, I think, keeps that going. Yet another dominating performance. I get it's a tough game in Camp Randall, jump around at night, great environment, but it's not going to do too much to this team.
No, unfortunately for Wisconsin, they just haven't really taken the leap a lot of people expected in year two under Luke Fickell. So going into the season, Oregon probably had this circled as one of their tougher games, and Wisconsin's just really been struggling. They've had two chances at home this year. They had Alabama come in there, and they had Penn State come in there at night, and just really were thoroughly dominated in both of those games with Penn State running away in the second half. So I think this will be more of the same. Maybe Wisconsin uses that crowd energy to be in this game for a half, but I can't see them competing for four quarters. And I think it'll be right around that line.
And then the last game of the week, Kansas, BYU. I'm going with Cougars at home because kind of tough to pick against the undefeated team. But I did it, I think, 2 weeks ago and it worked out for me. So maybe it'll work for you this week. But, BYU scraping by, beating Oklahoma State pretty much at the buzzer, beating Utah on a game-winning field goal. There's going to be one of these three games where I think BYU does slip up. And I don't think it's going to be this week because Kansas pulled off the upset last week, and now they're going on the road, and BYU is at home. I think it's a tough way to pick a Kansas team that's been really bad all year to win two in a row. With that being said, I'm going BYU.
So there's this thing called the law of averages. So sometimes you get something that just keeps going one direction. Eventually, it has to come back the other direction. So in this case, both of these teams have played a lot of close games this year. Kansas loses all of them. BYU somehow escapes all of them. At some point, those things need to come back to the average. And that's kind of what I'm banking on here. I think BYU easily could have two or three losses. Kansas could easily be, 7-2 at this point. Like I said earlier, they're the best 3-6 team of all time, and I think they're going to prove that here. A lot of people had high expectations for Kansas early in the season, and I think they're starting to finally figure it out, whether it's too late or not. And I think they can go into Provo and get a big upset win.
And that'll be it for this week's picks. Check back next week to see how we did. And obviously, with only a few weeks remaining, we'll be breaking down the week's biggest games. But until the next time, the Bench Buddies are out.